On today's show, we'll be talking about Alperen Sengun's Turkish interview with Socrates Sports, covering things like his offseason focus, the impact of the double big lineup, Fred VanVleet's leadership, the addition of Kevin Durant, and so much more. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. All right. On today's show, we're going to be talking about this exclusive interview that Alperen Sengun had with the most prominent basketball analyst in Turkey, Kan Kural. I hope I'm saying his name right, on the Socrates Sports channel on YouTube. And we're going to parse through this interview and kind of highlight everything that Sengun talked about, his focuses this offseason, what he's been working on, the impact of the double big lineup and playing with Steven Adams, Fred VanVleet's leadership, the addition of Kevin Durant, expectations for this next season, and so much more. It was a jam-packed, amazing interview. I'm going to put a link to the interview in the episode description. I highly recommend you go check it out, because we're going to be kind of paraphrasing some of Alp's answers through a combination of the English subtitles that are on the video. So the interview is in Turkish. However, there are English subtitles on the video, as well as, kind of parsing that, as well as shout out to Franchise Sengun on Twitter, who also did some translation, his interpretation of what Alperen Sengun was saying in this interview. So I have a combination of quotes and information kind of pulled from this that we'll tackle and kind of parse through on today's show. It was an excellent interview. I think by far maybe one of the best interviews that any current era Rockets player has been a part of. And they covered a lot of ground. It's about 45 minutes long, give or take. And so I highly recommend you go check that out. Starting things off, just, as we kind of go through this interview, they everything was really friendly at the beginning. And, the guys kind of started off just praising Alp for his, all-star selection and the honors earning that. And they were even joking that he'll be back with more accolades next offseason, right? Inshallah. Hoping that he'd be back with, an all-NBA selection, maybe as a champion next year. But the first major topic that they hit on was his offseason focus. And this is what Alp had to say. As you know, I sort of lost my touch this season. I focused on this a lot, my shots and finishing. Of course, my conditioning as well. This helped me a lot last season in my defense and ability to play longer minutes. And finally, my shooting. So Alp is aware of, and we've talked about this a lot on the show, about, his regression as far as finishing around the basket. And it was certainly a focus, or it sounds like it's been a focus for him so far this offseason. And he even went on to talk about the fact the coaching staff addressed it about, through the midway point of the season. He said that the coaches addressed the finishing issues. And he said, we know that they said to him, we know we're asking a lot from you, but we see that potential in you. Right. And he highlighted the fact that, after his injury in year 3 of his career, the one that ended his season against the Sacramento Kings a couple of years ago, that he went through a really tough rehabilitation process, right? Where he rehabbed for like 2 straight months, took like a 10-day vacation, and then came back and focused on just basketball, like just practice for 2 straight months before kicking off this past NBA season. And in that 2 months of rehab, right, he really worked on his body. He got his conditioning to a better place than it had ever been. His body was stronger than it had ever been. And he talked about that being such a significant focus, that and the defense being such an important focus for him, that he did kind of, lose some of the touch, and he wasn't as focused on the offensive side of the basketball as he had been in years prior. He went on to say, whatever the team needed, I was that player. Defense, defense. Offense, offense. Our coaching staff is built around a strong defensive philosophy, so I play alongside great defensive players. That's why things got easier. So it's really refreshing to hear such a candid kind of interview, and Alp really kind of highlighting and addressing, hey, these are some of the areas that obviously I worked on, right? He grew tremendously as a defender and being the backbone of the Rockets defense as a top 5 defense, going from top 10 to top 5 and potentially getting even better this upcoming season. But hearing him speak so candidly about how he's kind of, understanding and picking and choosing his spots and where he can be effective offensively, defensively, all that stuff. And the fact that this upcoming year, right, he's put a renewed focus on his finishing in and around the rim. He said that he's basically been in Turkey since May 20th. And that this is like the longest that he's been able to spend back home. And the fact that the Rockets have sent guys out to him, right? The entire coaching staff has come out to visit him. Ime's been there. Fred's been there. And that's, a great sign that the organization is able to, allow him that comfort of being at home while also still working on his game and refining the things that he needs to improve upon moving forward. Coming up, we're going to talk about what Alpi has to say about the impact of the double big lineup, how it makes his life easier, and what it's like playing with a vet like Steven Adams, plus Fred VanVleet's leadership, the addition of Kevin Durant, and so much more. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Look, most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your smartphone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally, feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Look, when I first started using Monarch, I was embarrassed and a little, disappointed in myself for how much money I realized I was spending on food. I'm talking like dining out at restaurants, fast food, carry out, delivery services, all of that. Now I budget smarter and save more. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, continuing to break down this interview that Alperen Sengun did. Again, the link to it in the episode description. He went on to talk about the impact of the double big lineup, and this is what Alpi had to say. When Ime Udoka introduced the double big lineup, it made my job a lot easier. Having to constantly be physical with the opposing center on defense and then switching to offense became very tiring. With the double big, my performance increased and I had more energy on both ends. The guys even joked about the fact that, the Rockets roster this year, it kind of seems like the goal is, to be even bigger than they were this past season. And Alpi joked, everyone's pushing like 6'10 now. He goes on to say it's Fred and everyone else. And then the interviewer goes, Fred and his bodyguards. And so that became a bit of a joke on the show. So I want that on a t-shirt, Fred and his bodyguards for this upcoming season. He went on to talk about what it's like playing with Steven Adams. He said Steven Adams is something amazing. He talks a lot. He directs me and Jabari in the zone defense. Sengun talked a lot about the impact of that zone defense and how he actually likes playing out of the corners in the zone defense. And even sometimes when it's just him and Jabari out there and they're playing zone and Adams isn't even on the floor, that he likes to put Jabari under the rim when Sengun's actually the 5 because he likes playing defense out of the corners. He's gotten really comfortable with it. He talked about the fact that the day that Steven signed, he directly called Ime Udoka and Rafael Stone and told them that normally when a team signs a center of Steven Adams' quality as a backup, they wouldn't be happy, but I was extremely happy. He goes on to say, I'm sure that he does, but I've never seen Steven Adams lift weights. He has his own unique workouts. He spends a lot of time stretching. Goes on to talk about there was a workout where Alpi's only job was to box out Steven Adams. He bear hugged him so that he couldn't get the rebound. And Adams lifted his arms and Alpi thought his shoulders were going to pop off. Talked about, basically almost dislocating his arms with how strong he was. And that Adams immediately was after like, are you okay? Are you okay? And Alpi was like, I'm fine. And that Steven's main focus, in practices and, shoot arounds, as a veteran of the roster, is for everyone to get better. For example, he sometimes lets Alp get shots off to raise his confidence. He doesn't care about losing in practice. He's a great veteran. And this is one of the underrated, Steven Adams has been such an underrated addition to this Rockets team. And just what he's been able to unlock for so many of the young guys. Not only is he such an incredible locker room presence, he's a super high IQ guy. He's incredibly smart. He understands, right, how to, communicate and talk things out on the floor, especially on the defensive side of things, right? When Adams is in the middle of that zone and he's got Alp and Jabari flanking him on either side, and he's calling out different coverages and explaining where guys need to be. Later on in the interview, Alp talked about the fact that the reason the zone defense works so well for the Rockets is because they're all incredibly high IQ guys. They all fully understand, what an opposing team is trying to do. They read things quickly, and that's why the zone defense was so effective for them once they started adopting that strategy and really leaning on it to close out the year, and in particular in the playoffs against Golden State, right? That zone defense, and Adams talked about this before, right? We had the clip of him calling it a bizarre kind of zone defense where guys are just flying around and all sorts of stuff is happening. That only works when all five guys are so interconnected and they're communicating at a very high level. And for Adams and sometimes Sengun, right, or even Jabari, to be the backbone of that zone defense, calling out different coverages, explaining where guys need to be, and then also the two guys at the top of that zone defense being, sometimes Fred VanVleet and Amen, or Amen and Tari, or whoever's at the top, or, this past season, obviously Jalen Green was a big part of that as well. When you have good defenders who are pressuring at the top of the zone, causing chaos, forcing turnovers, really dialing up the pressure, it makes it easier on that back line of the zone to be, the safety valve, right? Okay, guy got through. All right, now you're funneling him into the big guys, and he's still going to have a hard time getting a clean look off. So loved hearing what Alp had to say about Adams and his impact and how important he's been to the success of this team. Another incredibly important vet that Alp talked about, his relationship with Fred VanVleet. Alp had this to say. Fred has been an incredible leader since he first joined the team. He does a lot you don't see on the court. Controlling and leading the team is not easy. He also does this when he's not playing. In my opinion, there is not a single point guard like Fred in the league. Nowadays, point guards are focused more on getting their shots. Fred is not like that. He sees the potential in me. Fred and Ime get mad and argue with me time to time, but it doesn't last long. He's always in my ear. If I try to make excuses like, missing free throws or not going after an offensive rebound, he just says, no, why didn't you go? Why didn't you do that? Tell me that. So Fred and, this whole accountability mantra, right? And really, holding Alp accountable for things that he is or isn't doing, right? And, propping him up and, lifting him up when he is playing well, but also, and we've seen, just how hype Fred gets when Alp has big moments. Think about last season against the Timberwolves in the in-season tournament after Alp took over in the fourth quarter and overtime. And you saw Alp and Fred just like completely amped with each other at center court. It's so funny because the narrative on Fred when he left Toronto was that he was a bad influence on the young guys, that he was stunting Scotty Barnes' growth, that he was, a bad fit, that he was, out for himself, all this stuff. And honestly, through 2 years, that couldn't be further from the truth from the Fred VanVleet that we've seen in a Rockets jersey. And I know that some Rockets fans think, oh, he's, Fred's just a shot chucker and he's not good. And the Rockets should have tried to keep Jalen and they should have moved on from Fred. Fred is so important to the fabric of this team's identity. He's an extension of Ime Udoka and the coaching staff on the floor. And Alp mentioned other smaller things that he has. Like sometimes Fred is like down there boxing out bigs and helping the Rockets secure rebounds, like little things that go kind of unseen on the box score. And yeah, there's moments where, Fred has a game where he's, struggling to shoot the ball. He's coming off a career low as far as his shooting percentages are concerned. But that kind of strikes me as a moment where hopefully we'll see a bounce back season from Fred, where he gets back to the percentages that we're more accustomed to him shooting from three and just in general, because he's going to be more so in that role that he was better suited for, right? An ancillary role. Also, I know that y'all gotta, so in the YouTube comments, people got a running tally of, me saying the word ancillary. It's a good word. Like, it's a great word. He's a supporting member of the team. Fred's never supposed to be the guy. Like, if he's got it going in one game and he's, bombing 5, 6, 7 threes, awesome. Let Fred cook. But 90% of the time, Fred isn't him, right? He's the table setter. He'll knock down open shots. He'll get other guys, quality looks, but Fred can't or shouldn't be the guy that's averaging 20 or 25 points a game on 15 shot attempts. That's not his bag. And he doesn't need to do that. It's just, he had to do it a lot this past season sometimes because the Rockets offense really lacked some of that pop, some of that punch at times. But it's great hearing about that relationship. Sengun also talked about his relationship with Jalen Green. He said that it was upsetting that Jalen was traded. Jalen was like my brother. He said Jalen comes off as a very cool kid, of course, but when you get to know him, he's super kind. He's always helpful. Some players, they try to act cool around their teammates, but Jalen wasn't like that. He was incredibly sweet. Alpy went on to say, I think Jalen is going to be a big player. I told him, I hope this makes you more motivated. Sometimes he battles with himself. I think he will become more mature and no longer do this. And then they got into talking about the addition of Kevin Durant. This was the big one. Alp said, I reached out to Kevin and told him I'm excited to work together. He said, we're going to have fun and do a lot of great things. Alperen Sengun said that he's always in communication with KD during games. Apparently at one point last season in one of the Rockets matchups with the Suns, he said in one of the games, it was right around the All-Star break, he said, I told him one game, don't come double me. Let me play a one-on-one. And KD said, no way. You're an all-star now. You're no longer going to play one-on-one. Get used to it. And Alp finished off by saying, even as an opponent, he was like a mentor to me on the court. And the guys and Alp also talked about, that Kevin isn't just, an elite finisher, but he's also, a great defender as well in his own right. And so he meshes perfectly with what the Rockets are trying to accomplish. And the analysts actually brought up the fact that, Alp was used a lot more this season as a finisher as opposed to an initiator, as a playmaker. And they even highlighted the fact that at times it feels like Alp's greatest strength is his playmaking. And that was part of the conversation where Alp got into, just whatever the coaching staff wants me to do, whatever they need me to do, I'll do it. He joked about the fact that sometimes Ime gets mad at him for not taking more shots in a game, where Ime will tell him, I don't care if you miss the shot, go take 20 more shots just like that one. Because if it's a high quality look, you live with those misses because eventually you believe, right, the shots will start to fall. They will start to go in. And, talking about the fact that, you have Alp, right, who's shown those playmaking flashes, who commands so many double teams, right? The only player in the league that commands more double teams than Alp is Nikola Jokic. And so now you've got an elite weapon in Kevin Durant, right? As an outlet for those double teams. You've got Amin Thompson, another year older, another year wiser, more mature in his game. You've got Fred VanVleet, hopefully on a bounce back season. You've got shooters like Jabari Smith Jr. and Dorian Finney-Smith, and another elite cutter, and at times can be a knockdown shooter in Tari Eason. Like, there's so many ways for Alp to play this upcoming season. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw Alp jump up to, 6 or even 7 assists per game this year, with just how much attention he commands and the ways in which the Rockets are going to be able to scheme around that attention in order to capitalize offensively. And for the Rockets to be the best version of themselves, I don't think it's with Alp as the number one option, right? He was the number one option kind of by necessity, in the past couple of years, right? As mainly a finisher, but the best version of the Rockets has felt like when they play through Alp as a playmaker, and you've got KD doing the heavy lifting offensively, and then Alp's like that secondary or tertiary option on offense instead. Coming up, we've still got to talk about Alp's view on the finals and how the NBA is progressing, talking about his experience in the playoffs as well, his battles with Draymond Green, the growth of Amin Thompson, and championship expectations for this upcoming season. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right. The interview continued on, and Alp was asked about the kind of the way that the NBA is progressing, the intensity, the defense, things like that. And Alp talked about the OKC Indiana finals, and he said he kind of highlighted and talked about, right, the narrative going into the finals with that it wasn't going to be exciting because, two like lesser known teams, small market teams, whatever. But he said the intensity was off the charts, and the basketball IQ was top notch. It was true team basketball. He talked about the tempo, and he said it wasn't just one or two guys carrying the team. I hope this trend continues. And then he gets into talking about his experience in the playoffs. And this was arguably, this was maybe my favorite part of the entire interview. He talked about, his first taste of the playoffs, and this is what he had to say. That game 3, I was feeling great all day, thinking I'm going to dominate once I step on the court. But as soon as I got out there to warm up, it hit me. The crowd, the playoffs, something inside me changed. Normally I go out strong, confident, but this time I stumbled. The playoffs hit me. That was my worst game, game 3. I missed everything, wasn't effective on defense. After that, I focused better, but that game hit hard. We talk about this a lot. When young players experience the playoffs for the very first time, hitting that wall, right? The lights are bright, the pressure's cranked up, your first visit to an opposing stadium in the playoffs, right? And I'll tell you what, going out to the Warriors' house in the playoffs, that's a very tough destination to perform. And to hear Alpi be so honest about the fact that he got the playoff jitters, right? He struggled in game 3. But to his credit, right? He bounced back after game 3. He was a monster in game 4, had the chance to win the game, and unfortunately missed the shot there at the end, at the very end against Draymond Green. Was probably dead tired and exhausted from, the way in which the Rockets had to play and battle throughout that one. Talking about a very incredibly physical series with the Warriors. But I think that moment, right? Like and we see this all the time, once young players get that first taste of the playoffs, once they get over that moment, once they've experienced it once or twice, that's when they're able to settle in. And it's not that the playoffs ever just becomes, it's just another game. It's just it's just a Tuesday night. Who cares? It's not that. There's still stakes. There's still pressure. There's still probably some anxiety and some, concern, fear that goes into it, right? But at the same time, it's different than that first ever feeling. And it very much sounds like Alpi got past, the butterflies in that moment and was able to rise to meet the rest of the, the expectations the rest of the way in the playoffs. But I just thought that was maybe my favorite moment of him being just so candid and honest about his experience in the postseason. He also talked about the physicality, talking about the Warriors and the fact that they're a very experienced team and they fouled a lot in the playoffs. They don't call it, but they were the ones crying all series about fouls not being called. When it comes to us, we're not really allowed to complain. It's more of an internal thing. Ime Udoka doesn't allow it. He loses his mind if we complain. And in that acknowledgement of the playoffs, right? Alpi kind of, I think he also acknowledged, he was, self-aware, and the fact that he made fun of himself a little bit, how normally, if he gets hit, if there's contact on a play, he puts his arms up and he goes, what the heck, that was a foul. Like, he was very animated about it, just like we see him, in a lot of games. And that's been a bit of a sticking point, right, with Sengun, is that sometimes he might be a little too preoccupied with, getting the foul call or trying to draw a foul, or, getting upset if the refs don't blow the whistle. And, we see that split second reaction. And he was talking about how Ime, sometimes when he's going over film, that, if he sees players complaining about not getting a foul call on film, that he loses his mind. So, and he was like, it's Ime's job to talk to the refs, right? It's not our job. And so hopefully that's something that continues to grow and that he gets better at, right? Is because that's certainly an area that, if you get caught up with the officials, if you're too focused on what they're calling or not calling, then, it can take you out of the game, right? You can be not as focused on what you need to be focused on, especially in a high pressure environment like the playoffs. He talked about his battling with Draymond Green too. And he said, never in my life has something like this scared me. If anything, it makes me angry. And they kind of laughed about, Draymond and his antics and all that. And how, Fred and Jeff, told them that the Warriors weren't going to be able to beat them with speed or strength because they were an older team, right? They were going to have to get inside their heads to be able to beat them. And ultimately they did, unfortunately. But hearing, that kind of that vet insight from Fred and from Jeff, was cool to hear. He also said, the more Draymond came at me, the more I went back at him. Right. And we've seen that Sengun doesn't back down from an altercation, from a fight. And there was that one play where like Draymond like got in Şengün's face and was trying to like antagonize him. And then Şengün immediately comes back in, runs a little 51 action with Fred VanVleet and gets straight to the rim and scores right after Draymond was like on some BS in one of those games. And you know, that's the kind of mentality you want to see one of your star players have, is just, you know, ignore the noise. Don't get into it. Don't be a pushover, but also like, you know, be ready to dish it back if needed. But just focus on the game and focus on doing what you need to do on the basketball floor. He also talked about Thompson and basically saying, you know, he had a few anecdotes here about Thompson and a fun little story as well. He said, Amin is an incredible athlete. There is seriously nothing else like this. Amin is very hardworking. As you know, in the NBA, there are other things like fit and, you know, like clothing, culture, all that kind of stuff, like pop culture stuff, you know, the star treatment that NBA players get. And Alpi went on to say, Amin is strictly basketball. He works hard in practice and takes his recovery seriously. He makes the most of his God-given athleticism. And he highlighted that there was a time, the time that Amin got injured chasing a triple-double when Ime left him in the game and he twisted his ankle like 2 plays later. He said there was one game Amin needed an assist or something to get his triple-double. Normally, Ime Udoka doesn't leave you in the game if there's a big score difference. There were countless times he didn't put me back in the game when I was close to a triple-double. But that game, Udoka let him play and Amin twisted his ankle. After that, I joked and said, Amin, you ruined it for all of us. Now Udoka will never let me continue to play. Alpi then he continued to joke that there was a few games later that after Amin's injury, Alpi was super close to a triple-double, and he asked Ime for 2 more minutes. And Ime said 2 more minutes, that's it. And when the 2 minutes ran out, he subbed him out. So like, you know, the rule is like hard and fast in place now and probably won't ever be broken again, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, because the injuries are stupid. But on the expectations for this upcoming season, Alpi said, there will be a lot of pressure this year, but I think the entire team has the strength to handle it. We are now like soldiers, Ime and his soldiers. I think everyone is extremely focused and working hard. And then the analyst Khan, he jokingly said now they've got Fred and his bodyguards and Ime and his soldiers, and all 3 guys had a good laugh about it. Alpi said, I hope we will live this excitement and will allow others to feel the same excitement when talking about you know, what it was like to see the Astros win the World Series and how happy everybody was in Houston, how excited the fans were seeing the parade in the streets. He was like, I want that, right? I want that for this team. I want that for us. And he went on to talk about, you know, the expectations for himself, right? That he was, you know, only, you know, one vote, not one vote, but one spot off of making the All-NBA team, right? He came in 16th for All-NBA voting this past season. And you know, he talked about that, you know, for himself, you know, goals for this next season is he wants to make All-NBA and he wants to be a champion. But he said that, you know, winning as a team comes first, and he doesn't care about any of the personal accolades, because he was like, he goes on to talk about, you know, you could be averaging 30 for the worst team in the NBA, but it doesn't matter. You know, he's like, I don't care if I get All-NBA as long as we win as a team, as long as we win, you know, a championship. I'm okay with whatever comes with that. And you know, they even highlighted the whole debate about, you know, should Domantas Sabonis have been an all-star over Alperen Sengun? And the analysts even brought up, like, yeah, like if Sabonis was the 2 seed in the West, like he might have gotten it over you because the stats were very similar. And I thought it was just cool to kind of hear that conversation trend that way, where you talk about how much the team success element plays into some of those, you know, more so narrative-based awards, you know, whether it's things like MVP or all-star selections or all-NBA selections, that kind of stuff. So that was a pretty cool part of the conversation. And then kind of toning things down, wrapping things up, they talked about the Western Conference a little bit. Alpi said, the West is dangerous. You can say there is no bad team, but this is also good for us. It will get us ready for the playoffs. You play more focused against better teams. And, you know, Alpi was super lasered in and focused, saying this, like, no, like super calm, cool, collected. Like, you can tell Alpi's ready for this next season. He's ready to go to war and ready to try and win a title. And he closed things off by saying, Houston is my home. I want to see the people happy. Honestly, it was a stellar interview. It was great to hear these thoughts from Alpi. He's, you know, grown so much in, you know, his comfortability doing interviews in English, but at the same time, it's no replacement for hearing somebody speak their native tongue and, how he's able to get across his points a little bit more comfortably, and probably address things with kind of the ease of mind of not having to like in real time translate things. And that's not a slight to LP. Like his English has gotten tremendous, right? But at the same time, hearing this interview in Turkish, being able to kind of for him to laugh around and joke and, crack some jokes and have a little fun with the interviewers as well, was really heartwarming to see. And they talked a little bit about Eurobasket and his expectations there. And, he was, very excited to talk about, playing for the Turkish national team and, wanting to bring back a medal or a cup for his home country. And that's something we'll be definitely covering here on the show. The Turkish national team played a friendly match against Germany the other day, and Alpi wasn't supposed to participate in the friendly match. I wasn't expecting him to. And then I tuned in like halfway through the game and I realized Alpi was playing, but he wound up, the Turkish team lost that game 73-71 to Germany. But Alpi was super dominant in that one. So it looks like the offseason shooting regimen is working. He had 25 points, 9 rebounds, and 4 assists. He was a perfect 9 of 9 inside the arc. The only 2 misses that he was 9 of 11 from the floor overall. The only 2 misses that he had against Germany were 3-pointers. And then he was also 7 of 9 from the free throw line. So if that's any glimpse at the version of Alperen Sengun, now granted, he was going up against like Daniel Tice. So, we'll see what he's like against like, big time NBA competition, not like bench player NBA competition. But it was still really cool to see. And he had, oh my God, he had one filthy move in that game where he like split a couple defenders, spun around, had this tight handle on the ball, got all the way to the rim and yammed it home. Somebody tagged KD in a highlight video of that dunk from Alpi against Germany and was like, yo, KD, have you seen this? And KD just replied, different. Like, because Alpi's different, man. Look, excited for this next season. Was really, glad to hear this interview from Alpi. It was really cool to hear all his thoughts about different things. Definitely go check it out. Link to the interview in the episode description. I want to know your favorite part from the interview. What was your favorite part to hear about Alperen Sengun talk about? Go listen to the interview yourself or choose your favorite anecdote from what we talked about here on the show. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.